So I thought of starting with just the concept of neurophenomenology. How do we use it? Why do we use it? And then a little bit of background of how can we even study the self. And then that would be the big bulk of the talk is C, which is the dive into 3 different consecutive studies using the neurophenomenology in self-boundary dissolution in meditators. And then I would finish my dessert is talking about death processing. How do we even measure that? And what do we see in non-meditators and in meditators? And I probably don't get to say anything about that because of time constraints, but I also have something to say about ayahuasca users concerning death processing. So we might leave that to questions if there are. So just to say in general, my lab is about expanded consciousness, so either meditation. Last 5 years, we started also psychedelics, but we also look into sleep paralysis, lucid dreaming, even channeling. So yeah, I'm just going to focus on meditation, but the way I see it, the sense of self and the way we process the self and the way we process the death are topics that are related and are across all these altered states that I just mentioned, probably others that I'm not studying. To start on a poetic note, this is a poem by Dogen. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. To be enlightened by all things is to remove the barriers between oneself and others. I love this quotation because it puts together probably all my interests. That's the way, that's the self, that's the boundaries. And it's even going all the way to enlightenment, which is a recent paper that came out 2 months ago with a big bunch of people around the self-pattern theory of Sean Gallagher and how can we translate or transform these states, deep states of meditation into a long-term change, into a trait of self-liberation or, if you like, enlightenment. Wouldn't have the time to touch upon it, just saying. It's out there. So, part 1, neurophenomenology. Let me see my clock. Okay, here I am. Francisco Varela, Chilean neuroscientist, mathematician, philosopher, really a man of many deeds. He started the scientific research program that was aimed to remedy the hard problem of consciousness in a way that is pragmatic. So let me see if I have it here. Yes, the hard problem of consciousness, just for those who are not familiar, is basically why any physical state appears to us as an experience at all, or in the words of Thomas Huxley, how is it that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as the result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp in the story. So why is it? What is the connection between neural phenomena and consciousness? And to advance the study of consciousness without falling into this gap, the explanatory gap, what Francisco Varela proposed is to combine neuroscience, which is a third-person kind of objective measure, if you may, with phenomenology that is the first-person perspective. And he was referring to the continental philosophy of Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, and in that way bridge between the neuro and the pheno in order to study mind and consciousness. So his project basically proposes, this is a paper that we just published with Antoine Lutz in Biological Psychiatry, that is a kind of a review of everything that was recently done in the world of neurophenomenology and how can we advance the field. And I don't know if you can see my mouse, but basically the idea is not just, okay, collecting phenomenology, collecting neural data, but we also want to use them in a way that constrains reciprocally each other. And also we want to use them in order to create formal dynamical models. That would be the pinnacle of the project. And I think that the work of Antoine Lutz is starting to touch upon that with predictive processing and phenomenological models related to the enactive approach. So the whole thing is very promising. You know, you just collect first person, collect third person, and here we are gapping the explanatory gap, but in practice it's very, very challenging. And the problem is that I'm going to give you a list of problems, but just to say that in 2017, I actually published this little thing that is a summary of the literature up to then, that is looking at all the theoretical papers about neurophenomenology and the empirical projects. And in theory, so much more was out there in theory saying, this is, you know, this is the way we should go about studying consciousness, but in practice, much less empiric projects. Okay, and here is another paper that we published that we call The Hitchhiker's Guide to Neurophenomenology, that is trying to provide to young people in the field with the sense of how can we go about it in a pragmatic way. The challenges is that there's a tension between the depth of the lived experience, and interviews are mostly in words, and you can interview 1 hour about a moment of experience. But then it's very hard to correlate with the neural data. On the other hand, we can collect a lot of neural data, but then we don't have the phenomenology, which becomes very thin or maybe not even existent at all. Which it might sound weird, but most studies in cognitive psychology and neuroscience still do that. For example, showing negative pictures that are supposed to evoke negative emotions and look at the neural measure of it without even knowing what was the lived experience of the participants. Did they even have a specific emotional reaction to that? And if so, what is the resolution of that? So the higher the resolution of the lived experience, the less easy to naturalize the results or mathematize them in order to have the reciprocal constraints between the two. So we have a difference in resolution between them, and also we need a special training. Philosophers, usually phenomenologists, train in interviews or microphenomenology, and neuroscientists, they train in, you know, working with neural measures. And it's a very unique training in both fields. So what is needed usually is a collaboration between scientists or students and so forth. In the paper, The Hitchhiker's Guide, we suggested a couple of bridges from the easiest, just to validate the first person with the third person data, or front load our phenomenological, our insights into the design, but then it goes up all the way to the mathematical modeling. And in the paper, we give examples for each and every bridge, just for those who might be interested in looking deeper into that or using that in the future. So This is from the Embodied Mind, really a seminal book by Francisco. We believe that mindful awareness practices can provide a natural bridge between cognitive science and human experience, he means phenomenology. Particularly impressive to us is the convergence that we have discovered among the main themes concerning the self and the relation between subject and object. And so this, for me, is a nice bridge to the next step, in the words of Varela, saying that studying the self is a good topic for neurophenomenology, is a natural bridge between first person and third person data, which is exactly what we are doing. And this brings me to the second part. How can we even study the self? This is going to be like 5 minutes. It could be a semester. Generally, self-conceptualizations, there are so many. It depends if you're looking on a psychological level, but here I'm looking from the angle of philosophy of mind, and it boils down to a very gross conceptualization of the self as a dual nature, which is by different authors, by different researchers, they gave different names. William James maybe was the first, calling it the I and the me. Antonio Damasio is calling this the core self or the autobiographic self. Then Dan Zahavi is the pre-reflective and reflective self. I'll go with the names of Sean Gallagher, the minimal and the narrative self. So the minimal is, think of a baby. Think of your pet, if it's a mammal. It's very embodied. It's in the moment. It has agency and ownership because obviously it has the sensory motor loops. So experience is happening to me and I'm the agent of my action. I'm located in the center of the experience. So this is my perspective. The whole cognition is perceptual. There's no need of memory or language or anything sophisticated. So in terms of phylogenesis, it's, it came primary. And then we have the narrative self, which comes later. It comes with high-level cognitive functions, memory, and language, because it's about stories. It's about identity. It's about memory of ourselves that starts to build up like a story, future planning. It's a conceptual representation of myself. And why do we use this specific, very gross dual nature of the self? Because there's a great crosstalk with neuroscience. Let me see. Because we know today, yeah, pretty good, what are the neural bases for these two self-experiences. The underlying mechanism for the narrative self is by large the default mode network, that is a resting state network that is related to mind wandering, more specifically the midline structures of it, but also the medial temporal lobe with a episodic memory. And this is known for, I don't know, from 2001 is the discovery of the default mode network. It took a couple of years to realize its role in underlying the narrative self. It took some more, maybe even a decade more, to realize what might be a possible underlying mechanism for the minimal self. And this is a paper by Olaf Blanke in Trends in Cognitive Sciences that is showing this kind of sensory, motor, attentive loop, interoceptive, that is about the embodied self and its location. Now, let me point out here the posterior cingulate cortex and the temporoparietal junction, just because they come up as heroes in the story that I'm about to tell you next. And that is the story of how do we even study self-boundary dissolution. So first study was just a proof of concept, and then a case study which developed into a large-scale study. Let me walk you through this. This study was published in 2013, so we probably started it 1.5 decades ago with a small grant by the Bile Foundation. We decided that we invite people to the MEG, same people that were already in the fMRI, in the Weizmann Institute, so we could really do a good source localization for them. And we had 12 participants. And what we did is that we asked them to create for us narrative self by asking them if they could repeatedly think what characterizes them. But then we thought, okay, how can we evoke a minimal self-experience? And this is what we came up with. Try to experience what is happening to you at the present moment. But then we wanted to also to evoke a no self experience. And then we came up with this. Try to experience what is happening in the present moment when you are not in the center. These practitioners were around, I would say, 3,000, 5,000 hours of accumulated practice. And for them, there was no significant difference in the success or stability of the 3 different states. So, looking at, very long story short, looking at the brain, when we look at the transition from the narrative to the minimal, so reduction in the narrative self, is revealed as gamma activity reduction in the midlife frontal region that is part of the default network, which is a sanity check. We know that from the literature. But what is happening when we reduce the minimal self, trying to go from minimal to no self? We didn't know that. We were really just playing around. And what we came up with is beta reduction within the inferior parietal, that is a part of the TPJ that I showed you before, part of the network that is supporting the minimal self, the embodied self. In terms of phenomenology, I'm not going to go through all that, just to say that the way we use the phenomenology was to place them in 3 different groups. Finally, we realized that this group, that we called them at the time lack of ownership, they were really going the deepest into the selfless experience. And let's read this example. It was emptiness, as if the self fell out of the picture. There was an experience, but it had no address. It was not attached to a center or subject. It was not 100%, but there was no sense of an object there running the show. Emptiness is the best word. Now, any of you who know a little bit of Buddhism jargon would say, okay, emptiness is just a Buddhist jargon. But when we use neurophenomenology, we actually expect these people to be somehow different, not only in phenomenology, but also on the neural level. On the neural level, that would be some kind of a check for us that it's not just a jargon. And indeed, they turned out to be the most experienced in terms of meditation experience. This is, it's normalized. And the difference, when we compared them to the others, they had a distinct reduction in this right inferior parietal. That is a region that is about self-location, agency, and boundaries. So we understood that we need more phenomenology, not even phenomenology, but even microphenomenology, the deep interview. And we need to collaborate with somebody who is highly proficient. And then we came up the idea to do the case study with here, this is Stephen Folder. So he's an elder person. This is Stephen Folder. And he's the founder of the Insight Society, Vipassana in Israel. And he's been practicing for 40 years now. So we went to him and we asked him, how can we play around with this experience in the MEG that in a way that is consistent enough to have statistical power? And he said, I can dissolve my self-boundaries. And we asked him how many levels can he provide. I think he said something like 7 or 9. And we said, well, that's way too much for us. Let's just do 3. You know, the normal boundaries, the no boundaries, and something in the middle, okay? So we went for this. And the setup was in the MEG. The phenomenology of that was published in this paper. Let me see, I think I need to share my sound in order for you to, how do I do that? Advanced. I'm not sure. How do I share my sound? Oh, share sound. Okay. Now I have it. This is it, and share sound. Share. Okay.
To go out of the boundary is another level of relaxation. It's like a deeper level of letting go, of surrender, of a sense that there's no need for center. And as if I'm falling out of the center. That's the best language I can give. I'm falling out of the center of even of sensations. There's no sensations. It's like falling into space. The best description, someone once told me, an image. It's like jumping out of a plane without a parachute, and you're afraid. Except I'm not afraid anymore because I've done it so much. To fall into space, but then you realize there's no ground, so it doesn't really matter anymore. So it has a feeling of no ground.
So when we looked at the phenomenology of it, it seems like everything, internal versus external, sense of center, sense of time, location, just dissolves. What we are remaining with is slightly bodily feelings, touched structure. What is happening in the brain? In the brain, we saw only reductions. We were expecting to see something that is enhancing, maybe like holding some kind of attention, but they were just reductions. And the most significant reduction was in 27 hertz. It was mostly within the beta band, high beta. And again, we see the temporal parietal junction and the posterior cingulate. So now we understand that it can be volitionally dissolved, and it's definitely related both in terms of phenomenology, but also the neural level to the minimal self. But then we were asking, is it just Stephen? Is it just very proficient meditators that have been doing this for, I don't know, anything between 3,000 to 30,000 hours of meditation? Or can people that, you know, some slight meditation experience can do that? This is one question. We also wanted to know does it come with any cost or benefit? And so we extended to study the relationship between this and the flexibility of the embodied self and social processes and death processes. So this is the large-scale study that was already, I think, sponsored by 2 different other funding agencies. And we had 46 long-term meditators with a mean of 3,000, but some were even just 1 year of meditation. And then they were trained 3 weeks by Stephen, because people can meditate a very long time without working specifically on self-boundaries. You know, they can do many other things. And of course, we wanted to know if they have some kind of mental imbalance. First time they came to the lab, we just looked into the with boundaries, no boundaries. We also looked at sensory suppression, peripersonal space, but I'm not going to look into that now. But then, second time they came, we started looking into different social processes and the death processing. And then there was also a control group that I'm not going to show. This was already published. The phenomenology was published here already in 2021, but the neural part was just now published in 2024. And the results of the death denial is just really just accepted, and the social processes. So everything I'm showing you today is already out there. The phenomenology was done by 3 different people. So we had agreement, high agreement between the raters. The categories that we came up with is the sense of agency and location and the first person perspective, attentional disposition, body sensations, and affective valence. And each and every one of them had a continuum. For example, if we look at agency, it could either be active or responsive, that is intermediate, or passive. So to give you an example of active agency, this is the maintaining, wait a minute, I want the dissolving. So let's look at the active agency. My action is to try and keep blowing up this balloon. It's like a struggle between this centering gravitational force and the attempt to really push the dividing line outwards. And this is an example of a passive. A deep breath, and then everything loses its grip. Until now, I was putting an artificial barrier over sensation, and now it's possible to let go of this barrier and let it extend. This is location, first person perspective. Let's look at that. First person perspective, intermediate. An example, in the beginning, there was clearly a center referring to the boundarylessness. So there was some relation between 2 things. But in other moments, space was the dominant thing without feeling the you relating to space. This is the intermediate. Let's see the non-dual. There's a field of sensuality and it's not bounded. I'm not located anywhere. I'm not. It contributes to the dissolution. There's no sense of observer, no witness. He didn't lose the sense of being part of, not entirely. There's a sense of flow, and it is going through something. Let's look at the valence. It's also very interesting. This is the highly negative. I felt my heart pounding as if I'm in a dramatic moment of my life, really even slightly intimidating in intensity. I feel like being in a closed room all day and then opening the door and realizing I'm above a jungle. This is just 1 minute of no boundaries that they do volitionally, but still some people do have this highly negative experience. Let's look at a highly positive one. I felt more security or calm, like it's my home. Being without boundaries generated some sort of serenity, of spaciousness. Okay, these are examples. Another interesting thing is that between 5 of the 6 dimensions, they were highly correlated. The depth and the widths of the blue line shows how correlated they were, but valence was not correlated with them. That was a different thing. And that relates to my story in a moment. Now, let's see, in terms of technique, those who had the higher dissolution score were not those who were looking at sensations or trying to imagine. They were those who were just let go, relaxed. It also, the dissolution score, the phenomenological dissolution score, highly correlated with the hours of meditation. So it does work with experience. Then we created, this is how we mathematize or naturalize the phenomenology. So we took every category and gave it numbers, like the agency that was either active, responsive, or passive. And then we had a space that was made by attention, agency, and location. We somehow figured out that these are the most meaningful dimensions. And in the width sense of boundaries, people are kind of located in this region. So everything is like 1, 1, 1. The agency is active, the attention is focused, and the location is in the body. But then in the no boundaries, they started to spread out in the diagonal in the other direction, going into the passive, into the no location, into the formless attention. And by doing this, we were able to figure out, to distinguish between the full dissolvers, those who received the highest score, and all the others. So again, we could contrast between these two. So each participant has a dissolution score that we can correlate with the brain, but we can also distinguish between these two groups. By the way, they again showed no difference in quality and stability between
Pero yo creo que es también porque hay gente con los micros abiertos y a lo mejor si el resto que no está hablando lo cerramos. Prueba a ver, ahora hablar, Rebeca.
Can you help with that, George? Thank you. Okay, so they had no issues. It was stable, the quality was high in both conditions for them. Also, nothing was correlated with 5-dimensional altered state of consciousness scale, just to show the added value of using phenomenology. Because later on, the phenomenology is correlated with the brain, but the altered state of consciousness questionnaire is not. Okay, let's look at the brain. What do we see? Let's just look at panel B, that is the dissolution versus maintenance, because that's a better baseline than just baseline that we are not sure what they even did. But in any case, what we see is the strongest difference is a reduction in very precisely 27 hertz high beta. That is again grossly located around TPJ or PCC regions. And when we compare the full dissolvers to all the others, we find in the posterior cingulate significant difference in scores. So this is pretty much what I wanted to say, and maybe just to sum up these 3 different experiments, that the first one, the proof of concept, was using the first 3 bridges by validating the phenomenology with the neural data. So it's not just jargon. Also front-loading our insights. Why even study selfless experience? Because we had them, and so we use it to design the study. And we also jointly analyze the first and the third by contrasting the 2 phenomenological groups. In the case study, again, we did exactly this same three things. However, in the large-scale study, we were able, because it's an iterating process, we were able to use the third-person data from previous study to guide our interview. For example, we were asking about attention that we didn't in the first place. And then we can reanalyze the first-person data according, that's a little complicated, according to the first-person enriched third-person, analysis. Forget it. I'm not going to go into that. For this, you can look up the paper. The point is that we didn't go all the way to do cognitive modeling with these studies yet. Okay, and now to the what for, and is it good for us or not good for us? And this is quite an interesting result. This is an emotion recognition task. Our intuition was that since they dissolve the boundaries, they would be more sensitive to the other people's emotions. Both negative and positive. But what we found out is that they were less sensitive to negative faces. So the stronger the neural flexibility in beta 27 hertz in the posterior cingulate that we took as a marker of minimal self-volitional flexibility, the stronger it is, the lower the emotion recognition in the negative faces. And we were kind of puzzled by that. And then we realized that identifying negative faces is a very survival cognition. We need it in order to survive. It's like the default network that constantly imagines the next catastrophe based on the previous catastrophe because it is for survival needs. It's better. However, there is this cost that we pay with happiness when we are in the survival mode. So it seems that people that have the ability to be very flexible with their boundaries are less in this survival mode cognition. This is just an interpretation. We have the result, and this is my interpretation on it. Happy to hear other ideas. Now, we learned that the neural effect is very robust. It really just sinks into the 27 hertz. And just recently, I was in the MESEC in September and meeting with Guillaume Dumas. He raised the idea that 27 hertz can be kind of an harmonic on the alpha peak frequency. But I don't know, we didn't test that, just trying to come up with an idea, what exactly is it? What we do know is that beta frequency is the language of predictions. If we go to the predictive processing framework, so reducing prediction in regions that support the embodied self seems to be the underlying mechanism. We also learned that less proficient meditators can also do that. We also learned that can we enhance, but not only reduce the boundaries? Yes, they also enhance the boundaries. Does it come with a cost? Yes, it does. So we have at least less negative emotion recognition. But what I'm going to show you next is that we also have heightened existential resilience that is actually less death denial. And here I'm jumping to the last part. Okay, up until now, this is the gang, and this is the funding. From here, I'm jumping to a study that was mostly led by Dr. Yair Dor Zeiderman. This is this guy. And he came up with this genius task. First of all, everybody knows that everybody else is going to die. This is the words of Stephen Jenkinson. So a grief literacy advocates. There's a big thing about dying, death. That's probably the greatest human fear. And a lot of people are interested in processing death, discussing death, like the phenomenon that is very worldwide now spread, the death cafe. People meet and discuss death. So this is the death denial task that Yair developed. It's simple. It relates the self to death by showing your own face, some stranger face, and showing above it either neutral words or death-related words like grave or corpse or whatever. So the task is pretty simple. It's an oddball, and they have to press a button when they see the sunglasses. Everything goes pretty fast. And let me walk you first with our expectation, okay? We know that there is a self-bias effect. So if there were no words above, it was just my face and stranger face, I expect to have more processing to my own face. This is the basic self-bias. Now, if I look at a face with a neutral word above it or a death word above it, I would expect, I'm sorry, this is so not theological. You'll tell me later what you think. But we can expect to have higher processing for the death related because it's frightening, because it's related to the terror management theory that we have negative reaction to death. So the expectation was that self would receive more processing than other, and death would receive more processing than neutral. These are the results. This is the neutral other. This is the neutral self. Neutral self receives more processing as expected because of the self-bias. This is the death. This is the death other that is not receiving more than the neutral other. They're practically the same. But this is the death self, which is pretty remarkable, almost zero processing. So own death, there is an automatic response of defending against one's own death. The brain is not processing as if we didn't even see this stimulus. And this neurophysiological marker of death denial was correlated with a reported fear of death by a questionnaire. This is what we know, and this was already published in 2019. This is what we know about death processing in the general population. Now, the expectation with these meditators that dissolve the boundaries is that they would somehow rectify this kind of denial effect, because they work with dissolving the boundaries of the self, and they might not be that intimidated or reluctant to process own death. And these are the results of the meditators. This is the control, no processing for the death self. And these are the meditators, highest processing for death self, which is pretty remarkable. And it's just coming out. It's not a preprint anymore. So they show less death denial. What is interesting is that the death acceptance index is positively correlated with the affect during the boundary dissolution. So those who freaked out, they would have less death acceptance. Those that felt like coming home or very positive affect were those who received the highest score on the death acceptance index. Psychedelics, I think not. I think not. Not going to show you, keep you curious. Maybe just I would maybe say that. Jumping over, let me just jump over the psychedelic part because I don't have the time. Or maybe if I'm here, let me say that they don't show the death self high processing. So in a way, they are much more the ayahuasca veterans, 50 of them that had around 50 ceremonies each. They don't show the death acceptance like the meditators, which I think is pretty interesting. And just to say that all this is these are the people working about ayahuasca and death. And all this is a part of an ongoing project, the Tiny Blue Dot project, that is looking into complexity measures. That's way too complicated, I know, but we have 5 work packages looking into developing a scalable neurofeedback tool that would enable this boundary dissolution in novices. And at the same time, study complexity measures in the meditators and psychedelic users and trying to model it on a computational level. And these are all the people involved in this Tiny Blue Dot project. Yes, so here I'm going to end. Thank you so much.